Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit on bell icon to get the latest updates on QA automation side. Welcome back guys to Rahul Shetty Academy YouTube channel. So in this lecture, I will show you how to log network activity on your web application. So you should be able to log all API requests, responses, what all activities happened on your web page. So this is one of the very important feature which many of community is looking for from Selenium. So because that will help you to understand where exactly things went wrong when you see failure in your Selenium report. Okay, so until last version, if something goes wrong, you will see a failure, but you don't understand where exactly things went wrong. Okay, to know the issue, you will actually debug from the networking tools and see which API call got failed, or you will see which API call got 404, or what API call is actually making the test fail on UI, right? But that API logging, everything you can do on Selenium side. So you can log API request calls, response calls, and you can get each and every API response status code into your Selenium. Okay, you will be able to print and log all the response codes also. So this way, if you can log all the information, and let's say tomorrow your test is failed, you can simply open the log file and see which API request is failed. Based upon that, you can understand why the UI rendering is failing. Okay, so if you see something wrong in UI, most of the cases it would be based upon some failing response on API side. If it is not giving the data properly, or if something goes wrong from backend, front end will mess up, right? That is most of the times that was the reason for the functional errors. So if you can log that response code, response body in your file from Selenium, then instead of replicating the issue, or instead of saying simply it as a flaky, you can open the log file and see what exactly happened and why the test is failed by reading your network logs. That's a cool feature, right? So if you are already in automation field, you will definitely appreciate this feature. So now let's try to understand how you can log all that information from Selenium Chrome DevTools integration. Right, so let me close all the browsers. All these are from our previous execution. Now let's take this app as an example, Angular app demo. So come to the network tab, and when you land on this page, okay, so you will see some kind of HTTP calls, all the calls which are made, right? When you select virtual library, and you see there is one API request which is made to the backend to get all the book details. So the book details, whatever you are seeing here, is coming from the API call, and this is the response. This response is rendering on the browser. Okay, you can see it here. So tomorrow, if this table fails to load the data, and if you have a nice API logging in your Selenium, you can come here and see what status code you got it when it failed to load. If you see any 400, then you can understand that this is an issue from the API call. As API failed, that's why front end did not render the data. But when you see success 200 okay in your Selenium logs, but still data failed, then you can say there is something wrong in the front end code. You see, the troubleshooting is faster. You can easily understand if it is issue with front end or back end if you have nice logging like this. Until last version, Selenium do not have access to the network level to get the calls information, but yes, now it is possible, and now our goal is to figure out that. All right, so on Chrome browser, let's quickly initialize the DevTools object. I personally love this feature to have it on Selenium side. And next you have to initialize session by calling create session method. Okay, right, so let's come back to our CDP documentation, and for all these network related things, if you scroll down, there will be one domain called network. Yeah, You can read the description of this domain. It says that it will allow tracking network activities of the page. That's what we need, right? It exposes information about HTTP, file, data, requests, responses, everything. So here where we are interested in. Okay, so first there is a method called enable. So this will enable network tracking and events to the client. So in our case, client is nothing but our Selenium. Okay, so if you call this CDP method, that will enable network tracking and it will give all the information back to our client. Okay, so first step, you have to call this method. So obviously there will be custom command on Selenium side. So devtools.send. So inside this you have to call that method. So this is network domain and enable is method, right? So in Selenium side there is a class called network.enable. So you have different methods with the same name. So choose the method which matches with your browser version v91 or whatever. Okay, so it gave us 3 parameters here which you have to fill up. And if you read the documentation, all these 3 parameters are optional. It's all about how much buffer size, like how much data you have to preserve in sending back to the client, and when you have to stop everything. But for now, let's put them as optional because these are optional parameters. So that means it will give all the data whatever it found, right? So to give it as an optional, if you observe the enable method parameters, you see optional, all the parameters are wrapped under optional class. So what you can do, you can just say optional dot empty. So this represents absence of value, right? So with empty values, you have enabled network traffic so that your client, which is Selenium, can listen now. Okay, but how you would receive the response back? Okay, you are enabled that listening, but you should get to your output, right? So for that, if you scroll up, there are concept called events. So what are events? Events are nothing but some activities which are getting triggered. So now when loading failed, this event method will get triggered. Okay, and when loading finished, this is the method which will get triggered. So events are meant to be get triggered, right? So in our case, when response received back to the server. Okay, so now when you hit all that, when you try out clicking all the details, when you get response back from the APIs, that is when we need to track, right? We need to track what is the response code, response body, response URL, everything. Okay, so we want to wait until this event to get triggered, response received. So this event will get triggered whenever browser receives the response back from the network, right? So here you can see there are a lot of networks are there, but mostly this is the one API which we are tracking. So whenever the response you get back from API, before rendering it browser, before rendering on the browser, this event will be triggered. Whenever browser receives the response, hey, I got triggered. So you should catch this event, and from this event you should pull all the details and print it to the Selenium side, right? So if you click on this event, it says this event is fired when HTTP response is available back to the browser. Awesome. So let's get this response. Now, how you should catch when that event is fired? So we now understood that event will get fired when you get response back, right? So from Selenium you should catch it. So for that, Selenium have given one method in DevTools class dot add listener. So we will keep on listening to that event. You see, first argument of this listener is event and second parameter is consumer. Okay, so here you should give an event, and whenever that event is get fired, we are listening. So we are adding to our listeners. So we will be notified. Selenium will be notified when that event is fired, right? So what is the event? Here event is network.response received. So for that, in Selenium side, they have designed a class called network, same response received. Okay, so if you go to that method declaration, you will see this is an event. Awesome. I hope you understood. So we are adding listener so that we can listen to that event. So once the response you receive it back, the data what this method gave us will be handled back to the consumer. Okay, so second argument here for add listener is consumer. So when event happens, the event handler will be taken care by this second argument, right? So in the second argument, we just received the whatever response you got back. So it's like response object. Okay, in JavaScript terminologies, we call it as an object. So you received an object. On this object, now you have to act upon, right? So you have to give lambda expression whenever you are dealing with consumer handler. Okay, because this is not just a value what it received back, it is an consumer object what you got from this event. So on this object now you can play around. So here you have to give lambda expression, and this object scope will be inside this block only. Okay, once you come out of this block, this object scope will not be available, right? So inside now you should write all the logs what you can catch up. So as this returns the response object back, when you say response object dot, you get all these methods available for you. Okay, so for you, if you want to get response class object, you see there is a response class here. To get access to that object, you have to say get response, right? So once you get that response, again if you give dot, then you will get information about all your details of your API, like get headers, get request headers, get response headers. See, you can play around now. If you want to get status, get status. So every response status now will be logged in your output, right? So if you select this method, you see it is returning the response object back. If you want to know what this response object emits, then if you scroll up in types, you should see one network dot response. See, this is the object it is emitting now. When you do response dot get response, this is the object it is emitting, and you will get access to all these methods now. Step by step, now let's figure out. So first you got the status, right? System dot out println. First I will get that response into one object, response rs. Move your cursor and import. Okay, we don't have 91. Check for your compatible browser version. All right, so rest dot get me the URL, right? It will give you the URL. And next, if you want to get the status of the URL of the request what it fired, because that is very important, right? Based upon that you can decide if it is pass or fail. Get status. What else you need? These two details are sufficient, I guess. So what is the API call made and what is the response back you got? Okay, so you can also check for headers, whatever response returns back, like response headers, everything you can play around. So let's get started with these two details for now, right? Okay, so this is the setup we made. We did not start our test yet. Okay, so this is the initial setup. So what we did, we enabled network so that, you know, Chrome DevTools now can pull the traffic from Chrome DevTools and it will give back us to the client, right? So we opened one connection to receive the information, but which information we want to receive, we did not yet informed. So that's how we have written event. So whenever there is an event like response received, whenever this event is fired, we are adding a listener. So that way this event response object will be emitted and we are catching that object and from that object we are getting the response, and from that response object you are printing the URL and status, right? So now actually go to the web page and do some operations. Driver.get, go and take that web page details. So this is the initial landing page, right? After you land here, let's click on this virtual library, because this click will actually give us that service call. Okay, so it's a button. I can use router link CSS here. Driver dot find element by dot CSS selector. Don't I have any other parameters like ID? Okay, that's fine. So let me write one CSS here. Router link. I'll put regular expression library. Will this work? Okay, there are two elements matching when you try this way. So if you concatenate with button tag, I hope this will be unique. Perfect, this is unique. So this is our CSS dot click. All right. So just like how you had response event here, you can also have request event also. So let's do that as well before we run this test. So if you scroll up, you have seen an event which will be fired after response is received, right? So there is one more event which is also very useful for automation, that before request is being sent. Okay, so when request is ready to send to the server backend, you can track those details, like what request from our front end is going to the backend. Okay, so this will really help you in the upcoming lectures for you to mock the request and to get the response like the wish you want it. So the same syntax what you have used for response, if you read the description, it says fired when page is about to send HTTP request. So when our front end application is about to send, we can catch the details like what kind of request our front end is making. That details also we can log, because that's important, right? You get a response back, but you don't know what kind of request your front end is sending. Without that information, though your response failed, you don't have like what URL it sent, what headers it sent. Without that information, you cannot clearly tell that it's an API issue until you know what is the request information sent and what is the response information we got it back. So to know that request information, you can use this event, and let's use that. Event is request will be sent, right? Same format how you did here. We will add another listener, devtools dot add listener. This time in the network class, it's like request will be sent, right? So we will listen for this event to trigger. So once page is about to send HTTP request, this event will get triggered, and this will give us back an object which you can consume. So now you should resolve this object. So use lambda expression, and here this object is available for you to play around, right? One sec. Right, so request dot get request. So this is the method which will give access to the request object. Request rec. All right. So move your cursor and import. There are different packages. Change type of rec to request. That's what we did. Yeah. So on this request object, rec dot, and you can ask to get the URL. What is the URL of your API you are sending back to the server? That's important. Okay. So you should know what you are sending back. System.out.println get URI. So if you also want to know what headers you are sending, you can also get that information. But headers is another class. From there you have to go further down to get the objects, right? So it's up to you how you continue and get all these details. All right. So now I will run this test. before the request is sent to server, we should get logged with what is the URL we are sending to the server. So here I can comment it out. And once you get a response back, you will know what is the status code you got for the URL what you sent, right? Everything we are properly tracking here with the help of listeners, and in the listeners we are sending the events. Request will be sent, response received. So add all this configuration before you get started with your execution and run your test. So it has invoked the browser. All right, test execution is done, and if you scroll down, you see you got a different URLs what the calls are made, and you got a response back like this. Yeah, so the order what you see is not proper here, because by the time you got response 200 back, immediately other request calls are being made. So you can wrap both URL and response in one line so that you will see all that in a proper line. But anyways, you can see that response code what you got back here, everything is 200, so you need not worry. Whenever you see any status code 401, 404, then you need to get panicked that something is wrong. Okay, so of course you really need not check every time. When your automation test is failing, then you can open logs and see for which error code it is showing us 404, and then you can deep dive. But if your tests are passing, then you really not worry about what status code it returns. Okay, because our focus is more on front-end UI automation. There will be, however, back-end API test cases which takes care of this. It's only for our purpose to understand and troubleshoot the issue more, to see why our front-end tests are failing if you have logs like this. And you can clearly observe that we made a request of get book author name equals to Shetty to the backend server to get the content back. All right, so this is how you can track request and response in your log file. To make this log more optimized, you can write one condition here. See, whenever status code is 200, you really need not see in the output, right? You should get that logged only when something is failing, so that if your tests are failed, you can open the log and see which one is failed. Okay, so let's do one thing. Instead of logging everything, what I will do in the response, if the status code, whenever any API call is made, that status code will start with 4, right? 400, 401, 403, 404, all these are error status codes. So whenever any status code starts with the digit 4, that means there is some error in that API. So let's do one thing. This is an integer, get status. So I will convert that into string. So let's say you got error now, 404. Now 404 is a string. In that string, I will check whether if that string start with letter 4. Whenever you get any status code which starts with letter 4, that means there is an issue. And then let's go ahead and print that URL which is giving an issue, right? So here also we can print, right? I can use rest.get URL, and then you can write is failing with status code, and then you can give it this. Perfect. So now it will not log all the details. Now go ahead and comment all other remaining sysout printlns, right? So when I run this test now, it will only report me in the log if any API calls are failing with status code starting with digit 4, right? In our case, yes, there are no API calls are failing. Perfect. That's why I don't see any logs. I think you can improvise like this. Instead of having all the junk logs on your log file, you can improvise and report only when you see failure. So this is cool, right? And we can explore more and more on this in our upcoming lectures. Okay. Yeah. So please do subscribe, and there are a lot of things coming up and you should not miss them. So hit on that bell icon and get notified whenever a new video is launched. Thank you.